Every Christmas, a lonely old man sat in silence inside a dark house at the edge of a snow-covered town. No laughter, no visitors, no warmth. Until one snowy night, a knock broke the stillness. On his doorstep stood a single mother and her little girl holding a small red box, and in that single moment his life would change forever. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. Snow Ridge, Vermont. A small town tucked between pine-covered hills, the kind of place that looked like it had never known sorrow. Every porch was lit with gold, every window framed with garland and ribbon. The laughter of children drifted through the cold, the faint sound of bells echoing from the church steeple down the hill. The whole town seemed to breathe warmth, except for the very last house on Pine Hollow Road. From the road, the house looked dark. The curtains were drawn tight. The porch light flickered weakly, its glow barely reaching the crooked, no trespassing sign on the fence. Wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of smoke and snow. Inside, Arthur Hemsley sat by the tall window, a mug of tea cooling in his hands. He was 72, his face lined and weathered, his hair white as the frost outside. The radiator hissed beside him, the only sound in the house. On the mantel sat a picture frame turned slightly toward the wall. Every now and then he glanced at it, but never long enough to look. He took a slow breath, the kind that came from years of talking to no one. "Another Christmas, Margaret," he muttered. "You'd tell me to quit talking to ghosts." He smiled, just barely, but the kind of smile that hurts more than it heals. It was the only kind he remembered how to make. The tea had long gone cold. He reached for the second cup on the table, the one he still set out every day, a habit he never broke. His hand trembled. Slowly, he pushed it away, the porcelain scraping against the wood. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow fell thicker now, blanketing the road in white. The town bells chimed 9 o'clock. Somewhere in the distance, he could still hear the last of the carolers, faint voices drifting home through the cold. For a moment, Arthur's eyes softened. But then he closed the curtain, shutting out the light and the sound all at once. He preferred the dark. It didn't ask him to remember. He stood to put out the lamp, and then 3 knocks, soft, even, certain. Arthur froze, his brow furrowed. No one ever knocked on his door, not in years. He listened. The wind howled once, then quieted. Maybe it was a branch, he thought. Maybe the storm. Then came the second round, louder this time, followed by the faint crunch of feet. He set down his mug, the sound small in the vast quiet. "Who in God's name," he muttered, and after a moment's hesitation, made his way to the door, his slippers whispering against the floorboards. He unlocked the latch and cracked it open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and biting. Snowflakes swirled into the entryway, melting on his sweater. The reflection of the street lamp caught his face, half in shadow, half in gold. And there, framed by the porch light, stood a young black woman, her coat dusted white, and beside her, a little girl holding a red box tied with string. The woman smiled, though her cheeks were flushed from the cold. "Good evening," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm sorry to bother you, we just moved in down the road, the blue house with the red door. The postman mentioned you lived alone, and my daughter insisted we bring cookies to everyone on the street. You're our last stop." Arthur blinked, squinting against the snow. The woman's dark curls peeked out from beneath a wool hat. The girl's brown eyes were bright, wide, curious. He looked from one to the other, then at the box. "At this hour?" he asked gruffly. The woman's lips curved faintly. She was too excited to wait till morning. "We tried 3 other houses first. Figured we'd finish the whole street." The girl, maybe 5 or 6, shifted on her boots and held up the box with both mittened hands. "They're chocolate chip," she said. "Mom says Christmas cookies taste better when you share them." Arthur's frown deepened, but something about the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so certain, made him hesitate. His eyes flicked toward the snow whipping past the porch, then back to the girl. Her coat was too thin, her breath came in quick little clouds. "You shouldn't be out this late," he said finally. "It's freezing." The woman nodded, her tone gentle but unafraid. "I know, we just wanted to stop by. We'll head home now." Before she could turn, the wind gusted again, sending a spray of snow across the steps. The girl flinched, tucking her chin into her scarf. Something in that small innocent motion cut through Arthur's cold like a knife. "Wait," he muttered, almost against his will. His hand tightened on the doorframe as the cold bit at his skin. For a heartbeat, he nearly closed the door again. The safe thing, the familiar thing. But the sight of the little girl shivering beside her mother made something inside him twist, quiet and painful. He hadn't heard another human voice in days, maybe weeks. He exhaled, the sound rough in the quiet. "Come in," he said finally. Voice low, "just for a minute." The woman looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Arthur sighed. "I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't." She smiled, relieved perhaps, and guided her daughter inside. Snow melted in droplets along the entryway floor. The house seemed to exhale as the door shut behind them. For the first time in years, there were other voices within these walls. The moment the door closed, the old house seemed to hold its breath. The faint rattle of the window pane softened, and the cold night stayed where it belonged, outside. Arthur stood by the door a moment too long, unsure what to do next. Even the air seemed uncertain what to do with company again. The silence felt heavier with people in it. Laia brushed snow from her coat, small flakes melting against her dark skin. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and a loose curl had escaped her hat, falling across her forehead. Poppy's little boots squeaked as she shifted her weight, leaving wet footprints on the old wooden floor. She looked up at Arthur like he was some mysterious creature from a storybook, part frightening, part fascinating. "Your house is big," the little girl said softly, eyes wide with wonder. "It's really quiet in here," Arthur grunted. "That's how I like it." She smiled, unbothered. "It sounds like the snow stopped just to listen." Arthur stopped mid-step. The words hung there, fragile and pure as the snow outside. He turned toward her, caught off guard by the poetry of a child who didn't even know she'd said something profound. The woman laughed under her breath, shaking the snow from her hat. "This is Poppy," she said. "I'm Laia, we're your new neighbors." Arthur gave a curt nod. "Arthur Hemsley." Poppy gave a little wave, her mittens still damp. "Hi, Mr. Hemsley." He nodded again, unsure why his chest suddenly felt tight. The woman's smile was kind but not pitying. Her eyes, deep and steady, held something he hadn't seen in years, patience. And as snow gathered on the window sills outside, the silence that had lived in that house for so long began to loosen, just a little. Laia glanced around. "I hope we didn't interrupt your evening." She just wouldn't let it go. "We've been baking since 6, Arthur frowned, as though unsure what to make of that. Laia gave her daughter a gentle look that said not everyone needs conversation to be kind. He grumbled something under his breath, then motioned vaguely toward the living room. "Well, you're here now, sit if you want. Tea's probably cold, but I can warm it up." It wasn't much of a welcome, but for Arthur, it might as well have been a red carpet. Laia smiled softly. "Tea sounds nice." He moved stiffly to the kitchen, his slippers scuffing the floor. Laia and Poppy followed, pausing at the edge of the dim room. The place looked untouched, as if time had stopped in it. The counters gleamed from being cleaned too often. A single chair stood pulled slightly out of place, the only sign of life. The air smelled faintly of dust and peppermint tea. Poppy climbed onto the chair with a little hop, her legs swinging. Arthur pretended not to notice. The old kettle hissed as he filled it, the clink of metal echoing through the quiet house. "You said you just moved in?" he asked. Laia nodded. "A week ago, down near the blue house with the red door. It's small but cozy." "Cozy," Arthur repeated, almost tasting the word. "Haven't heard anyone call Snow Ridge that in years." Laia tilted her head. "You've lived here long," he gave a short laugh, without humor. "Long enough that people stopped knocking." She caught the hint of something in his voice, weariness or regret, and let the subject drop. The kettle whistled. He poured steaming water into 3 mismatched mugs. The sight of him setting one in front of Poppy, unasked, made Laia's chest warm in a quiet, unexpected way. Poppy took a careful sip, then wrinkled her nose. "It's bitter," Arthur grunted. "That's because it's tea, not chocolate." Laia laughed softly. "You might be outnumbered, Mr. Hemsley. We're cocoa people." He lifted a brow. Figures, something about the way he said it wasn't mean, it was almost teasing, the closest he'd come to human warmth in a long while. Laia caught the trace of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth and decided not to ruin it by pointing it out. Poppy slid the red box across the table. Mom said I could give these to you now. Arthur hesitated. Cookies, chocolate chip, Poppy said proudly. I helped stir. Mom says the secret is to use extra brown sugar so they stay soft. He eyed the box like it might explode. Then reluctantly he opened it. Inside, uneven cookies lay in wax paper, each one a different shape. He picked one up, turned it over, sniffed it once, and took a bite. Poppy leaned forward, watching him with unblinking excitement. Do you like it? Arthur chewed slowly. It's edible. Laia sighed, but Poppy giggled. That means yes, she said, grinning. Arthur looked at her, surprised by how easily she laughed. He tried to look annoyed, but the sound of that laugh, it did something strange to the air in the room. It loosened it, made it easier to breathe. Laia took a sip of her tea and looked around. You keep it spotless in here, she said. Old habit, Arthur replied. When it's clean it's quiet. She smiled faintly. And quiet means safe, right? He didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward the living room where the faint outline of a picture frame still sat, turned to the wall. Laia noticed the glance but said nothing. Some silences weren't meant to be broken too soon. Poppy, still swinging her legs, suddenly gasped. You don't have a Christmas tree. Arthur blinked. Never saw the point, but trees are happy, she said earnestly. They make the house smile. Laia gave her daughter a soft warning look, but Arthur only sighed. Maybe the house forgot how. Poppy frowned, thinking deeply about that, then hopped down from the chair. She untied the pink ribbon from her hair and crossed the room toward the small fake plant near the window, a dusty thing that might once have been green. She tied her ribbon carefully around one of its branches. There, she said. Now it has something pretty. Arthur watched her, the corners of his eyes tightening. No one had added anything new to his home in years. Everything inside these walls had belonged to the past. Yet here was this child, adding color without asking permission. Laia whispered, almost apologetic, she means well. I know, he said softly. For a long moment, no one spoke. The clock ticked. Snow pressed against the window. Then faintly, from somewhere far away, the church bells rang the 10th hour. Laia stood and reached for Poppy's coat. We should get going. Thank you for letting us warm up, Mr. Hemsley. Arthur nodded, his voice quieter now. You shouldn't walk back in that wind. I'll walk you to the gate. They smiled, surprised at the offer. At the door, Poppy turned back, her mittened hand clutching the knob. Good night, Mr. Hemsley, she said. Don't forget, your house is smiling now. He chuckled, low and rough, and nodded. Yeah, I'll try to remember. When the door closed behind them, the silence returned. But it was different this time. Lighter, warmer, almost fragile. Arthur stood by the window again, watching the two figures walk down the snowy road. Their footprints trailed behind them, soft and fleeting, disappearing into the white. And on the dusty plant near the window, the pink ribbon shimmered faintly in the glow of the street lamp, a small living thing in a house that had forgotten how to live. Morning came slow to Pine Hollow Road. The sun rose pale behind a veil of snow clouds, casting the town in a washed-out silver light. In most homes, coffee brewed and radios played softly. In Arthur Hemsley's house, the only sound was the kettle clicking off. He stood at the window again, same as always. Only this time, something was different. On the withered houseplant near the glass, a pink ribbon fluttered faintly in the heat from the radiator. The air caught in his throat. For a long while, he simply stared at it, that little thread of color in a room that had forgotten color existed. He thought about taking it off. He even reached for it once, hand hovering above the branch. But his fingers stopped halfway. He let them fall, the ribbon stayed. Arthur spent the day trying not to think about it. He fixed a squeaky hinge, cleaned out the wood stove, even sorted the mail he hadn't opened in weeks. But no matter where he went, his eyes kept drifting back to that window, to that pink bow, to the echo of a child's laughter that somehow refused to fade. By afternoon, he found himself at the front door, coat on, boots laced, telling himself he just needed fresh air. The truth was simpler, he wanted to see if they were real. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked down the road. It had been years since he'd walked this far, without a reason. The houses glowed warmly under the weight of snow, smoke curling from chimneys. At the end of the street, stood the small blue house with the red door. Arthur hesitated at the gate. A light flickered in the kitchen window, and the faint sound of laughter drifted out, a woman's laugh, gentle and musical, followed by a child's squeal. He felt something twist in his chest. It had been so long since laughter felt close enough to touch. He turned to leave just as the door opened. Mr. Hemsley. Leah stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Her dark hair was tied up loosely, and a strand had escaped to rest against her cheek. She smiled, surprised, but not unkind. "I didn't think you'd be the kind to take walks." Arthur cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. "I needed to check the snow level on the road." Leah laughed quietly. "That's a new one." Before he could reply, Poppy darted out behind her, bundled in a fuzzy pink sweater, her curls tucked beneath a hat with pom-poms. "Mr. Hemsley," she called, grinning, "did the ribbon make your house happy?" Arthur froze, unsure how to respond. "Well, it hasn't complained yet." Poppy giggled and ran down the steps, slipping a little on the ice before catching herself. She held out something in her mitten, a small cookie wrapped in napkin. "I saved you one. The last one." Arthur took it carefully, as though it might crumble. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said simply. "You looked like you needed one." The words hit harder than they should have. He stared at her, at that innocent certainty, and for a second, his throat went tight. "Thank you," he managed. Leah stepped closer, folding her arms against the cold. "You can come in for a minute if you want. It's warm and I've got coffee on." Arthur hesitated. He could feel every excuse forming in his head, things to fix, chores to finish, reasons to say no. But before he could, Poppy reached up and took his gloved hand in hers. "Come on," she said softly. "It's cold out here." He looked down at her, this little hand wrapped around his, and something inside him gave way. Inside the blue house, the warmth hit him like memory. The smell of cinnamon and sugar, the low hum of an old radio playing a gospel Christmas song. Leah's kitchen was small but alive, photos taped to the fridge, a bowl of fruit on the table, a few paper snowflakes Poppy had cut out hanging by the window. It felt like life. Messy. Loud. Real. Arthur stood awkwardly by the door, hat in his hands. "You run a tight ship," he said, scanning the room. Leah smiled. "Tight enough to keep the heat bills down." He nodded, unsure what else to say. His eyes landed on a small stack of unpaid bills by the fruit bowl, neatly clipped together. She followed his glance, her smile faltering just a little. "Still trying to catch up," she said. "Moving isn't cheap." He shifted uncomfortably, hating that he'd made her explain. "Town's expensive," he muttered. "Not many folks stay long. Maybe we will," she said quietly, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Poppy likes it here." Poppy sat at the table, humming softly, as she drew with a broken crayon. "I made you something," she said without looking up. Arthur frowned. "Me?" She nodded, sliding a piece of paper across the table. It was a drawing, crooked lines, smudged color of a house with smoke curling from its chimney, and a bright pink ribbon tied around a plant in the window. 3 stick figures stood outside it, holding hands. Arthur stared at it for a long moment. "Who's that supposed to be?" Poppy grinned. "That's you. That's me. And that's Mom." He looked up sharply, caught between surprise and something else he didn't have a name for. Leah's voice softened. "She draws everyone she likes." He cleared his throat again, his voice rough. "She shouldn't waste paper on old men." Poppy giggled. "You're not old, you're just wrinkly." Leah laughed out loud, shaking her head. "Poppy," Arthur chuckled, a sound rusty from disuse. "Guess that's fair." For a few moments, time seemed to forget itself. The wind howled outside, but inside, it was warm. There was coffee, and the smell of sugar, and laughter so small it barely disturbed the air, but it was laughter all the same. When Arthur finally stood to leave, Leah handed him a paper bag. "Take some cookies for later." He tried to refuse, but she pressed it into his hand anyway. "It's Christmas week, let someone do something nice for you." He nodded, eyes down. "I'll bring the bag back." She smiled. "No hurry." As he stepped out into the cold, he looked back once. Through the window, he could see them, the two of them moving through that tiny kitchen, their shadows soft against the golden light. For the first time in years, Arthur realized the silence outside wasn't comforting anymore. It felt lonely. He walked home slowly, his breath turning white in the air. Inside his house, the pink ribbon waited by the window, dancing gently in the heat. He set the paper bag on the table beside it, and stood there for a long time. Then, almost without thinking, he turned the picture frame on the mantel face up again. In the photo, his wife was smiling, and beside her, his son, young and proud. Arthur's hand brushed the edge of the frame. He whispered, almost to the air, "Maybe you were right, Margaret. Maybe the world isn't done with me yet." The ribbon fluttered once more, catching the light. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like waiting. Days passed in quiet rhythm. Snow Ridge settled deeper into winter, the roads turning to glass under the weight of ice. Most evenings, Arthur still sat by his window, but now, the pink ribbon swayed gently beside him, a small reminder that the world beyond his walls still breathed. He had started to walk more. First to the end of his driveway, then to the mailbox, then farther, all the way to the little blue house with the red door. Sometimes he brought a jar of jam, sometimes a loaf of bread, pretending it was a neighborly trade. But the truth was simpler. He liked the sound of that child's laughter. He liked the way Leah filled silence with something that didn't demand an answer. On this particular afternoon, smoke rose from his chimney for the first time in years. He'd spent the morning splitting old wood, and decided the cold wasn't winning this year. As he set another log on the fire, a soft knock came at the door. He opened it to find Leah standing there, her scarf dusted with snow. She carried a small bowl covered in foil. "I made stew," she said with a shy smile. "Thought you might like some." Arthur frowned. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said simply. "But I wanted to." He hesitated, then stepped aside. "You'd better come in before it freezes solid." The house felt warmer now, less like a museum. The faint smell of cinnamon lingered from the last batch of cookies Poppy had helped him bake, or rather destroy. Leah looked around, smiling. "You've been keeping busy," Arthur shrugged. "Can't let the house fall apart. Bad enough the owner's half gone already." She laughed softly, setting the bowl on the counter. "You ever stop beating yourself up?" He looked at her, caught off guard. "Old habits," he muttered. "They're hard to kill." They sat near the fire. Outside, the snow fell thicker, softening the world beyond the window. The crackle of burning wood filled the pauses between them. Leah took a sip of her tea, her eyes wandering around the room. That's when she noticed it, the way Arthur's gaze kept drifting toward the mantel, lingering on something before pulling away. She followed his line of sight and saw the photo frame, now facing forward, but slightly angled, as if he still wasn't quite ready to look at it directly. She studied the image in the firelight, a younger Arthur, a beautiful woman with kind eyes, and a teenage boy with his father's jawline and his mother's smile. "You've got a son, don't you?" she asked gently. Arthur stiffened. "Who told you that?" "No one," she said. "I can see him. In the photo." He exhaled slowly, his gaze sinking into the fire. "Haven't seen him in years." She waited. Finally his voice broke the quiet. "It was winter, like this one. My wife Margaret wanted to visit her sister that night. I told her to wait till morning. We argued. She slammed the door and drove off anyway." His eyes glistened in the firelight. "The roads iced over fast, she never made it." Leah's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm sorry," Arthur nodded once, the sound of the fire filling what words couldn't. My boy Ethan blamed me, he went on. Said if I hadn't shouted, she wouldn't have left. He was 17, angry, rightfully so. Packed his things and never looked back. For a long while, Laia said nothing. Then quietly, "Did you ever try to reach out to him?" He rubbed his palms together, staring into the flames. "I wrote him letters, birthday cards, sent them for years. He never answered. Eventually I stopped." He paused. "There's one I kept though, it's in the drawer by the desk. The last one I wrote. Never sent it. Couldn't get past my own shame, I guess." Laia hesitated, her voice softer now. "You ever think maybe he's waiting for it?" Arthur gave a bitter smile. "No one waits that long." She was quiet for a moment, eyes distant. "You'd be surprised," she said softly. Arthur looked up, and for the first time there was something different in her voice, a tremor she didn't hide. "My mother stopped calling after I told her I was pregnant with Poppy. Said I'd ruined my life. I told myself I didn't need her anymore. But every year I still think about dialing her number. I just never do." She gave a small broken laugh. "Guess silence runs in more than one family." Arthur didn't know what to say, but something in his expression shifted, softer now, less guarded. After a pause he rose and crossed to the old desk in the corner. From the top drawer he pulled out a yellowed envelope. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. He handed it to her. Laia turned it over, reading the name on the front, Ethan Hemsley. Her eyes lifted to Arthur. "You never mailed it. Wrote it over 10 years ago, kept rewriting it in my head. But this is the one I could never let go of. What did you want to say?" He looked at her, the answer caught somewhere between pride and pain. "That I was sorry," he whispered. "That I miss him, that I still set 2 places at the table every Christmas even though no one shows up." He gave a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Every so often I'd see a name in the papers. And Ethan Hemsley, some tech man in Boston doing big things. Started a company called Elridge something or other. I'd tell myself it couldn't be my boy. But the age was right. The hometown when they mentioned it once or twice." He paused, his voice dropping. "I even kept one article, folded up in the same drawer. I'd take it out sometimes, read about his success, and tell myself maybe he was better off without me dragging him down." His voice wavered, low and ashamed. "If it was him I'd have to face that he built a whole life without me. And if it wasn't, well then I'd have nothing left to wonder about. So I never checked, never wrote to the company, never tried to confirm it was really him." Laia's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. The old man's gruffness hiding such a deep aching uncertainty. "You never tried to find out for sure?" she asked softly. Arthur shook his head. Didn't want to be a ghost showing up to ruin whatever peace he'd found. "And if I was wrong, I couldn't bear the disappointment." Silence filled the room again, heavier this time. The firelight danced against his face, softening the lines that guilt had carved there. After a moment, Laia said quietly, "You know, pride and love sound a lot alike when you've been alone too long." Arthur looked at her, really looked at her, as if no one had ever said that to him before. Laia smiled gently. "Maybe he didn't stop waiting, Arthur. Maybe he just got good at pretending he didn't have to." He didn't answer, but his fingers brushed against the edge of the letter still sitting on the desk, the paper worn thin from years of not being sent. The fire popped. Laia's eyes drifted to the drawer Arthur had opened, still slightly ajar. She could just make out the edge of a folded newspaper clipping inside. She said nothing then, but the name stayed with her. Ethan Hemsley, Elridge Technologies, Boston. That night, Laia sat in front of her laptop, the house silent except for the ticking clock, and Poppy's soft breathing from the next room. Her hands trembled over the keyboard as she typed the name into the search bar, Ethan Hemsley, Elridge, Boston. It didn't take long. The results appeared, article after article. Ethan Hemsley, CEO and founder of Elridge Technologies, a health tech company making waves in telemedicine and accessible healthcare. There were photos, a confident man in his 30s, dark hair, strong jawline, Arthur's jawline, standing at conferences, shaking hands with investors, speaking at panels about healthcare innovation. She clicked on the company website. There he was again, professional headshot, bio listing his accomplishments, his vision for bringing quality healthcare to underserved communities. And at the bottom of the page, contact us. Her heart raced as she clicked through to the form. Then she found his LinkedIn profile, verified with the blue check, CEO at Elridge Technologies, Boston, Massachusetts. Previously worked at several major tech firms before founding his own company. This was real. This was him. Arthur's son. She paused, her finger hovering over the keyboard. For a moment the glow of the screen blurred through the tears she didn't expect. It wasn't just Arthur she saw. It was her own father, the man who hadn't spoken to her since she'd left home at 19. She'd told herself she didn't care anymore. But the truth was, some silences follow you, even when you build a new life. Maybe that's why Arthur's story hurt the way it did. The way he looked at that photo, the way he said his son's name like a prayer no one answered. She knew that pain too well. She stared at the contact form again, her reflection caught in the dim light of the screen. Maybe it's not about permission, she whispered. Maybe it's about mercy. Her fingers hovered, trembling once before she began to type. Dear Mr. Hemsley, my name is Laia Hartwell. I'm writing on behalf of your father, Arthur Hemsley, who lives in Snow Ridge, Vermont. I know this message may come as a surprise after so many years. Your father is alive and well. He speaks of you often, though he doesn't know I'm reaching out. He carries a letter he wrote to you over 10 years ago, one he could never bring himself to send. I don't know your story, and I don't presume to understand the pain between you. But I do know this, he misses you. He's followed your career from a distance, proud but too afraid to reach out. And sometimes, the hardest part of healing isn't forgiving someone else, it's forgiving ourselves. If you'd like to reach him, his address and phone number are below. If not, I understand. But I thought you should know. Your father is still hoping for one more conversation. With respect, Laia Hartwell. She added Arthur's contact information at the bottom, then hesitated over the send button. Outside the snow kept falling. Somewhere down the road, a porch light flickered on at the blue house with the red door. She clicked send. 3 days passed like held breath. Arthur noticed Laia had been quieter during her visits, distracted. He didn't ask why. He'd learned long ago that some silences were meant to be respected. On the 4th morning, she appeared at his door earlier than usual, her face pale, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. I need to tell you something, she said. Arthur's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took a deep breath. I found him, Arthur, your son. I found Ethan. Arthur froze, his hand gripping the door frame. What? That night you showed me the letter. The article you mentioned, I looked it up. It was him. Ethan Hemsley, CEO of Elridge Technologies in Boston. It's all there online. His company, his work, everything. Arthur's face went white. You looked him up. I sent him a message, she said quickly. Through his company website. I told him about you, about the letter. I gave him your contact information. Her voice wavered. I know I had no right, but Arthur, you've been waiting 15 years for courage that was never going to come. Someone had to knock first. Arthur staggered back a step, his breath coming sharp. You had no right, he said, voice rough. That wasn't your decision to make. I know, Laia whispered. But I couldn't watch you die without trying. They stood there in the cold morning air, the snow falling softly between them. Finally, Arthur's voice cracked. What if he doesn't answer? Then at least you'll know you tried, she said. But Arthur, what if he does? That evening, Arthur sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at his old laptop, a dusty thing he barely knew how to use. Laia had helped him check his email before she left, showing him how to refresh the inbox, how to recognize which messages were real and which were spam. Just check it once a day, she'd said gently. Or don't check it at all, that's okay too. But now, in the quiet of his house with only the ticking clock for company, Arthur found his hand moving toward the mouse. He clicked refresh, the screen blinked. One new message, subject line, re-message, regarding Arthur Hemsley. Arthur's hand trembled so badly, he had to set it flat on the table. For a long while, he couldn't bring himself to click it. His finger hovered above the mouse, shaking slightly. Then with a breath that sounded too loud in the quiet house, he opened it. The message was short, but every word hit like a heartbeat long forgotten. Subject line, re-message regarding Arthur Hemsley. For a long while, he couldn't bring himself to click it. His finger hovered above the mouse, shaking slightly. Then with a breath that sounded too loud in the quiet house, he opened it. The message was short, but every word hit like a heartbeat long forgotten. Mr. Hartwell, or Miss Hartwell, I'm not sure who sent this, I don't know who you are, or why you're reaching out now, after all this time. 15 years is a long silence to break with a stranger's email. But seeing his name again, I'll admit, it did something I didn't expect. I've spent half my life trying not to hate him, and the other half wishing I didn't. He hurt me in ways I still don't have words for. But he's still my father, and that's the part I could never unlearn. I'm in Vermont in 2 weeks for work, Snow Ridge actually. Conference at the Lakeside Inn. If he wants to talk, I'll be there Saturday evening, January 11th. The lobby bar at 7. If he doesn't come, I'll understand. Maybe that's how it was always meant to end. Ethan Arthur read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, each line cutting deeper than the last. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even kindness, but it was real. He stared at the blinking cursor, his breath uneven. For years he'd dreamed of hearing his son's voice again. Now the words on the screen felt both gift and punishment. He whispered, barely audible, "He's coming home." The sound startled even him. For the rest of the evening, Arthur moved like a ghost through the house, picking up things that didn't need picking up, checking the fire, rearranging the photo on the mantel for the first time in years. Every small act was an attempt to keep the panic at bay. When night came, sleep didn't. He sat by the window, staring into the dark. The wind outside had gone still, but inside him, everything was storm. At dawn, he finally stood. The first light crept over the snow-covered street. Down the road, the blue house with the red door glowed faintly in the morning sun. He found himself walking there before he decided to. Laia answered the door in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She blinked in surprise. "Arthur, it's barely 6, I got an email," he said. Her sleepiness vanished. From him. He nodded, handing her his phone. She read it silently, her eyes softening as she reached the end. "He wants to see you," Arthur's voice cracked, "or he wants to say goodbye in person." Laia shook her head. "You don't drive all the way from Boston to say goodbye." He gave a weak laugh. "You've never met my son." "Then maybe it's time you do again," she said. They sat in the kitchen, while Poppy still slept upstairs. The smell of coffee filled the small space, grounding the air between them. Laia smiled gently. "You're his father, recognition doesn't fade that easy." He rubbed his face, the weight of years pressing down. "I thought I was doing him a favor, staying away," he said once. "He never wanted to see me again." "You don't forget words like that." "Maybe he didn't mean them," she said. He gave her a tired look. "We always mean them when we're hurt." Laia's eyes softened. "Then maybe you both have something to forgive." Arthur didn't answer. Instead he stared into his coffee like it could give him courage. Finally he asked, "What do I even say to him?" "Start with hello," Laia said simply. "The rest will come." The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Arthur's life. Every morning he woke thinking it was Saturday. Every evening he rehearsed words that sounded hollow the moment they left his lips. Laia checked on him daily, sometimes bringing Poppy, sometimes coming alone. She never asked if he was ready, she just sat with him in the quiet, reminding him through her presence that he wasn't alone in this. On the Thursday before the meeting, she found him standing in front of his closet, staring at shirts like they were ancient texts. "The blue one," she said from the doorway. He jumped. "You scared me half to death." She smiled. "The blue one makes you look less like you're attending a funeral." He pulled it out, held it up, then put it back. "Maybe I shouldn't go, Arthur." He turned to her, and she saw it then, the fear beneath the gruffness, not of rejection, but of hope. Hope was more dangerous than despair because it asked you to risk the heart you'd learned to protect. "What if I make it worse?" he whispered. She crossed the room and took his weathered hands in hers. "Then at least you'll know you tried. But staying here, wondering for the rest of your life, that's worse than any goodbye." Saturday arrived, wrapped in cold fog. Arthur spent the morning polishing his old boots, trimming his beard, and changing his shirt 3 times, before settling on the blue one Laia had chosen. By late afternoon, the fog had lifted, revealing a pale winter sun. Laia stopped by at 6. She straightened his collar with the care of someone who understood that even the smallest things mattered on days like this. Poppy handed him a folded piece of paper. "It's for good luck," she said. Arthur unfolded it. Inside was a crayon drawing, 2 stick figures standing beside a tall tree, a bright yellow sun in the corner, and 3 words written in careful crooked letters. "Don't be afraid." He swallowed hard. "Thank you, sweetheart. You'll be okay," Poppy said confidently. "Mom says brave doesn't mean not scared. It means go anyway." Arthur looked at Laia, a flicker of emotion crossing his eyes. "You said that." She smiled softly. "I've learned a few things." The lakeside inn sat on the edge of town, all wood and amber lights, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and pine. Arthur pushed open the door at 6:55, and felt the heat hit him instantly. The lobby bar was quiet, just a few couples scattered at tables, soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, and there in the corner booth by the window, sat a man in his mid-30s. Dark hair, clean suit, shoulders that carried the weight of someone used to being in charge. His back was to the door. Arthur stopped. His throat closed for a moment. He would have known that posture anywhere, the same way his boy used to sit when he was angry but too proud to admit it. He took a breath and walked forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. "Ethan," the man turned. His eyes widened just slightly, not shock, not anger, but something between disbelief and recognition. Arthur stood there, his old coat dusted with melting snow, his hands shaking just enough to show. Ethan's voice was low. "You really came?" Arthur tried to smile, but it faltered. "You asked me to." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them was thick with everything they hadn't said in 15 years. Then Ethan nodded toward the seat across from him. "Sit, Dad." Arthur did slowly, carefully, as though afraid the chair might vanish if he moved too fast. Ethan studied him, his eyes unreadable. "You look older than I remember." Arthur let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "That's what happens when you wait 15 years. Ethan smiled faintly. "I guess it is." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, breathing, fragile. A waitress appeared. "Can I get you gentlemen anything?" Ethan glanced at his father. "Coffee." Arthur nodded. "Black." "2 coffees, please," Ethan said. When she left, the silence returned, but this time it felt less like a wall and more like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Finally Arthur spoke. "I've wanted to tell you how sorry I am." Ethan looked down at his hands. "I know." Arthur blinked. "You do?" He nodded slowly. "I read every letter you sent, the birthday cards, the Christmas notes, all of them. I never wrote back, but I read them." Arthur's eyes welled before he could stop them. "Then why?" "Because I was angry," Ethan said quietly, "and hurt, and for a long time, I didn't know how to separate the two." The coffees arrived. They both wrapped their hands around the mugs, grateful for something to hold. Arthur's voice trembled. "Your mother, what happened to her? It was my fault. I should have listened, should have let her go without the fight." Ethan looked up sharply. "It was an accident, Dad. A patch of ice. Bad timing. You didn't cause that. I caused her to leave angry." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but she chose to drive anyway. We were all stubborn that night, not just you." Arthur stared at him, the words sinking in like stones into water. "You don't hate me." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I did." He paused. "For years I did, but hate's exhausting. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was angrier at myself than I ever was at you." "Why?" "Because I left," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly. "I packed my bag, and walked out on you when you needed me most. We both lost her that night, and instead of grieving together, I ran. I told myself it was your fault so I wouldn't have to face my own guilt." Arthur reached across the table. His old calloused hand hovered before finally resting on his son's. "You were 17. You were just a boy. I'm 32 now," Ethan whispered, "and I still don't know how to say I'm sorry." Arthur's voice broke. "Then let me say it first. I'm sorry, son, for the fight, for not stopping her, for every year I let you believe you weren't wanted. I thought staying away was mercy, but it was just cowardice." Ethan's eyes shimmered. I thought the same thing. For a long time, neither of them moved. Outside the snow had started to fall again, slow and steady, like a benediction. And in that quiet, something long frozen between them began, finally to thaw. They talked for 3 hours, about Margaret, about the years apart, about Ethan's business, his life in Boston, the things he'd built to prove he didn't need anyone, about Arthur's isolation, the silence that had nearly killed him, and the knock on his door that changed everything. When Arthur mentioned Leah and Poppy, Ethan leaned forward. The woman who sent the email. Arthur nodded. She's the reason I'm here, her and her little girl. They reminded me what it felt like to be human again. Ethan smiled. I'd like to meet them. You will, Arthur said, if you're staying. Ethan hesitated. I've got meetings Monday, but I could extend through the weekend. Maybe longer. Arthur's eyes brightened. Yeah, Ethan said softly. I think we've got some time to make up for. They stood to leave, and for the first time in 15 years, father and son walked side by side through the snow. The following week brought a rare warmth to Snow Ridge, the kind that didn't come from weather, but from something quieter, human presence. Arthur's house, once the loneliest on Pine Hollow Road, now carried the faint smell of coffee most mornings, and the sound of voices where silence used to live. Ethan had extended his stay. His assistant in Boston wasn't thrilled, but Ethan had been firm. Some things are more important than quarterly reports. Most mornings, he worked from the small desk in Arthur's study, the same desk where the yellowed letter had sat for a decade. Sometimes Arthur would bring him coffee without asking. Sometimes they'd sit together in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. One afternoon, Ethan suggested they visit Leah's bakery. Arthur had mentioned it several times, always with a fondness that made Ethan curious. The bell chimed as they entered. The place was small but warm, with mismatched tables and the scent of cinnamon hanging in the air. Behind the counter, Leah looked up from wiping down the espresso machine. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw them together. Mr. Hemsley, she said smiling. And you must be Ethan. He extended his hand. Thank you for what you did. I don't think I ever said that properly. She shook it, her grip firm. You're here, that's thanks enough. Poppy emerged from the back room, her apron covered in flour. Mr. Hemsley. She ran over, then stopped shyly when she saw Ethan. Are you his son? Ethan crouched down to her level. I am. You must be Poppy. My dad told me you're the one who made his house smile. She giggled. With a ribbon. Best decoration I've heard of, Ethan said seriously. Over coffee and fresh muffins, Ethan learned about Leah's journey, moving to Snow Ridge, starting the bakery with almost nothing, the struggles she rarely mentioned but Poppy accidentally revealed. Mom sleeps on the couch, so I can have the bedroom, Poppy announced cheerfully. Leah's cheeks flushed. Poppy, it's temporary, she said quickly to Ethan and Arthur. Once the bakery picks up more, How much would it take? Ethan asked. Leah blinked. I'm sorry. To make things less temporary. To expand. Hire help. Maybe get a 2-bedroom place. She set down her cup carefully. That's kind, but I'm not looking for charity. Neither am I, Ethan said. I'm looking for good investment opportunities. And from what I can see, you've built something real here. Arthur watched the exchange quietly, a small smile playing at his lips. Leah shook her head. I appreciate it, but our company has a community initiative, Ethan continued. Small business grants for local owners, especially single parents. My father actually inspired me to push for it. I'd like you to apply, Ethan. Arthur said softly, don't push. But Leah was looking at the application form Ethan had pulled up on his phone, her eyes scanning the requirements. This is real, completely. And before you ask, no, you won't get special treatment because you know me. But you will get fair consideration, which is more than most programs offer. She looked at Arthur, who nodded encouragingly. Think about it, Ethan said. No pressure. That night, after Poppy had gone to bed, Leah sat at her small kitchen table with the application open on her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought about her mother, about the years of silence between them. About the shame she'd carried for getting pregnant young, for choosing to keep Poppy, for building a life her family had never believed she could manage. "Maybe it's time to believe in myself the way others do," she whispered. She filled out the application, attached her business plan, rough as it was, and clicked submit at 11:47 that night. The response came 3 weeks later, during the lunch rush. Laia was juggling orders when her phone buzzed. Application status: under review, interview requested. Her hands trembled as she read it again. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the company's regional office, an hour away. Ethan had insisted he'd drive her, but Laia declined. She needed to do this on her own. Arthur watched her leave that morning, standing at his window as her old car disappeared down the snowy road. "She'll do fine," he muttered to himself. But he paced for the next 3 hours anyway. When Laia returned that afternoon, her face was unreadable. She walked into Arthur's house. She had a key now, something that had happened so naturally neither remembered when, and sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Arthur and Ethan both stared at her. "Well?" Arthur finally asked. She looked up, and her eyes were red, but she was smiling. They approved it. Full funding, plus mentorship and marketing support. Arthur let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Ethan grinned. "I told you." "No," Laia said, standing up and crossing to Arthur. She hugged him tightly, surprising them both. "You told me, that night by the fire. You said, continuing is for the stubborn ones. I'm stubborn, Mr. Hemsley, because you taught me how to be." Arthur's eyes filled. He patted her back awkwardly, unused to the affection but grateful for it. "You taught yourself. I just held the flashlight." When she pulled away, she wiped her eyes and laughed. "Now I've got to figure out how to actually run a successful bakery." "You'll manage," Ethan said. "And if you need help with the business side, accounting, marketing, any of that, I know some people." She smiled at him, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people who'd both learned that accepting help wasn't weakness. February melted into March. Snow gave way to rain, and rain to the first shy crocuses pushing through the mud. The world turned as it always did, indifferent to human timelines. Ethan had returned to Boston, but not in the way Arthur had feared. He came back to Snow Ridge every other weekend, sometimes for longer. His company had opened a satellite office in Burlington, just an hour away, and Ethan had volunteered to oversee it personally. "Someone's got to make sure Vermont gets its fair share of innovation," he joked. But Arthur knew the truth. His son was finding reasons to stay close. The bakery, now officially renamed Sweet Haven, had undergone a transformation. New equipment, a part-time hire, an expanded menu that had locals lining up Saturday mornings. Laia had even managed to move into a 2-bedroom apartment above the hardware store, which Poppy declared was like living in a castle. Arthur helped where he could. He'd become the unofficial taste tester, the repairman for squeaky doors, and to everyone's surprise, the person who read stories to children during the bakery's new Saturday story hour. "Never thought I'd see you with a picture book in your hand," Ethan had remarked one Saturday, watching his father animatedly read to 6 wide-eyed kids. Arthur had shrugged. Poppy asked, "Can't say no to that girl." But beneath the rhythms of daily life, something else was building. Laia had become quieter in recent weeks, distracted. Arthur noticed her staring at her phone sometimes, her finger hovering over a number she never called. One evening in late March, as she was closing the bakery, Arthur knocked on the back door. "You're going to wear a hole in that screen," he said, nodding to her phone. She looked up, startled, then smiled weakly. "Didn't realize I was that obvious." "Your mother?" Her smile faded. "There was an article about the bakery in the regional paper last week. Someone from my old neighborhood sent it to her. She texted me." Arthur sat down across from her. "And I haven't answered," Laia said. "I don't know what to say. Hi Mom, it's been 6 years. Hope you're well. After everything?" "What did she say in the text?" Laia pulled up the message and showed him. "I saw your picture in the paper. You look happy. Poppy looks just like you did at that age. I'm proud of you, Laia. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. If you want to talk, I'm here. If not, I understand." Mom. Arthur read it twice, then handed back the phone. "That's a good start. Is it enough though?" Laia asked, her voice breaking slightly. 6 years of silence, and she thinks one text makes it okay. No, Arthur said gently. But maybe it's not about okay. Maybe it's about possible. She wiped her eyes. You're the second person to make me believe in possible. Who was the first? Poppy, she said with a sad smile. Every night she prays that her grandmother will meet her someday. She doesn't even know what she did wrong, but she prays anyway. Arthur's chest tightened. Kids shouldn't have to carry adult grudges. No, Leia agreed. They shouldn't. That night, she typed a response. Hi Mom. Thank you for reaching out. It means more than you know. I'm not sure what this looks like yet, but I'm willing to talk if you are. We could start with a phone call. She hit send before she could second guess herself. The phone rang the next morning at 7. Leia almost didn't answer, then saw the number and her hand moved before her mind could stop it. Hello, Leia? Her mother's voice was older, softer, uncertain. Is this okay? Is it too early? No, Leia said, sitting down heavily. It's okay. They talked for 20 minutes. Surface things at first, weather, the bakery, Poppy's school, then slowly, carefully, deeper things. I was wrong, her mother finally said. About everything. About how I reacted when you told me. About what I said. About walking away. I let my own fear and shame make me cruel, and you didn't deserve that. Leia's throat tightened. I thought you hated me. Never, her mother whispered. I hated that I didn't know how to help you. I hated feeling like I'd failed, but I never hated you. Then why did you leave? Because I thought you'd be better off without my disappointment weighing on you. I thought you needed space to become who you were meant to be. I was wrong about that too. They were both crying by the end of the call. No grand resolution, no perfect reconciliation, just two women admitting they'd hurt each other and wondering if there was still time to heal. When Leia told Arthur later that day, he smiled. Sounds familiar. Sounds like someone taught me that reaching out is worth the risk. Someone smart, I hope. She laughed through her tears. Someone stubborn. April brought true warmth to Snow Ridge, and with it a visitor. Diane Hartwell arrived on a Thursday afternoon, driving a sensible sedan and wearing a nervous smile. She'd called ahead, and Leia had agreed to meet her at the bakery during the afternoon lull. When Diane walked through the door, Leia stood frozen behind the counter. Her mother looked older, grayer at the temples, lines deeper around her eyes. But she still had the same warm brown eyes Leia remembered, the ones that used to light up when Leia brought home good report cards. Hi baby, Diane said softly. Leia's carefully constructed composure crumbled. Hi Mom. They met in the middle of the bakery floor, and when they hugged, 6 years of silence pressed between them. Heavy, painful, but finally breaking. From the back room Poppy peeked out, her eyes wide. When they separated, Diane saw her granddaughter for the first time in person. Oh, she breathed. Oh Leia, she's beautiful. Poppy approached cautiously, looking to her mother for permission. Leia nodded, and Poppy extended her small hand formally. Hello? I'm Poppy Hartwell. Are you my grandma? Diane laughed through her tears. I am, sweetheart. I'm so sorry it took me this long to meet you. That's okay, Poppy said seriously. Mom says sometimes people need time to be brave. Diane looked at Leia, who shrugged tearfully. I might have borrowed that from someone. They spent the afternoon together, awkward at first, then easier. Diane admired the bakery, helped frost cupcakes, and listened to Poppy's chatter about school and friends and the nice old man down the street, who read stories at the bakery. Mr. Hemsley, Diane asked. He's the best, Poppy declared. He was sad before, but we made him happy again. Diane looked at her daughter questioningly. Long story, Leia said, but it's a good one. That evening Leia invited her mother to stay for dinner at their apartment. It was small and cramped, but it was home. As Diane helped set the table, she paused at a drawing on the refrigerator, the one Poppy had made months ago, showing 3 stick figures and a house with a pink ribbon. This is lovely, Diane said. That's our family, Poppy explained, coming up beside her. That's Mommy, that's me, and that's Mr. Hemsley's house. See the ribbon? I gave it to him. It's very special, Diane said, her voice thick. Over spaghetti and garlic bread, they talked more honestly than they had in years. Diane apologized again, not just once, but specifically, naming the things she'd said and done that had hurt. Leia cried and told her mother how abandoned she'd felt, how hard it had been doing everything alone. You did an incredible job, Diane said, looking at Poppy, who was building a tower out of bread crusts. She's remarkable, and so are you. I had help, Laia said. This town, these people, they reminded me what family could look like. After Poppy went to bed, Diane and Laia sat on the small balcony, wrapped in blankets against the spring chill. I'd like to be part of your life again, Diane said quietly, if you'll let me. I don't expect to fix everything overnight, but I want to try. Laia reached over and took her mother's hand. I want that too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Snow Ridge twinkle in the valley below. The next day, Diane met Arthur. Laia had suggested it, wanting her mother to meet the man who'd helped change her life. They gathered at Arthur's house for coffee. Arthur, Ethan, who'd driven up for the weekend. Laia, Poppy and Diane. Arthur was nervous, though he tried not to show it. He'd polished the house within an inch of its life, and bought fancy cookies he didn't know how to serve. You must be Mrs. Hartwell, he said, shaking Diane's hand. Call me Diane, please. Laia told me what you did for her. For them. Arthur waved a hand dismissively. I didn't do much, just opened a door. Sometimes that's everything, Diane said. As they sat together that afternoon, 3 generations learning to heal, 2 families rebuilding what time had broken. Arthur caught Ethan's eye across the room. His son smiled at him, and Arthur smiled back. For the first time in 15 years, Arthur Hemsley's house was full of the sound he'd thought he'd never hear again. Laughter, conversation, life. The pink ribbon still hung on the plant by the window, faded now but holding strong. When summer finally arrived, it brought with it a transformation that went beyond weather. Snow Ridge bloomed, literally and figuratively. Sweet Haven Bakery had become the heart of Main Street. Lines formed every Saturday morning for Laia's cinnamon rolls, and the Wednesday afternoon story hour with Mr. Arthur had become so popular, they'd moved it outside to the small park beside the bakery. Ethan's satellite office was up and running, and he'd convinced 2 other Boston companies to open remote locations in the area, bringing jobs and young families to a town that had been quietly fading. He'd also been spending less time in Boston and more time in Snow Ridge, though he swore it was purely business. Arthur had noticed the way his son looked at Laia, carefully, respectfully, with the patience of someone who understood that some bridges needed to be built slowly. And he'd noticed the way Laia looked back, with the hint of something that might someday become more than friendship. But for now, it was enough that they were both learning how to let people in again. One Saturday in July, the town held its annual summer fair. Laia had secured a prime vendor spot, and the entire family, as they'd begun calling themselves, had shown up to help. Arthur manned the cash box, surprising everyone with his efficiency. Ethan charmed customers with his easy Boston sophistication. Diane worked the coffee station with the energy of someone making up for lost time. And Poppy, dressed in her pink apron, handed out samples with the enthusiasm of a seasoned saleswoman. Try the blueberry scone, she'd call out. My mom made them, and they're the best in Vermont. By mid-afternoon, they'd sold out of everything. As Laia counted the earnings, her hands trembled. This is 3 times what I projected. Arthur smiled. Told you this town needed you. No, she said, looking around at her family, the one she'd found and the one she'd reclaimed. I needed this town. I needed all of you. That evening, as the fair wound down and the sky turned gold, the family gathered on the hill overlooking town. They'd brought blankets and leftover pastries, and they sat together watching the sunset paint Snow Ridge in shades of amber and rose. Poppy lay between Laia and Diane, her head on her grandmother's lap. This is my favorite day ever, she announced. Mine too, sweetheart, Diane said, stroking her granddaughter's curls. Arthur sat beside Ethan, their shoulders almost touching, a closeness that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Thank you, Arthur said quietly. Ethan looked at him. For what? For coming back. For giving me another chance. Ethan's throat tightened. Thank you for finally letting me. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the hills. Laia watched them and smiled. She thought about the night she'd knocked on Arthur's door, terrified and exhausted, with nothing but cookies and hope. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up, on the town, on the bakery, on believing she deserved good things. You okay? Ethan asked, noticing her expression. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Just grateful, For what? For stubborn old men who open doors, she said, looking at Arthur. And for sons who come home when their fathers need them. Arthur cleared his throat roughly. Don't get sentimental on me now, but he was smiling, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes and stays there. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Poppy sat up suddenly. Can we come back here every year? Every year, Laia promised. Forever and ever, Arthur chuckled. As long as these old bones will carry me up this hill, sweetheart. Then forever, Poppy declared, with the absolute certainty of childhood, and looking around at the faces of the people who'd become her family by blood and by choice, Laia realized that maybe, just maybe, forever wasn't such an impossible promise after all. When December came again, Snow Ridge was ready. This time though, the last house on Pine Hollow Road wasn't dark. Lights strung along the porch railing, wreaths on the door, and in the front window, a small Christmas tree decorated with mismatched ornaments, and at the very top, a faded pink ribbon. Inside, the house that had once known only silence, now rang with voices. Diane had driven up from Massachusetts for the holidays. Ethan had taken the entire week off, first time in 10 years, his assistant had marveled. Laia and Poppy had been there since morning, helping Arthur prepare Christmas dinner with varying degrees of success. Dad, you're supposed to baste the turkey, not drown it, Ethan said, rescuing the roasting pan. I know how to cook a turkey, Arthur grumbled. Since when? Ethan shot back, grinning. Since your mother. Arthur stopped, the words catching, but this time, it didn't hurt. The memory was warm, not bitter. Since your mother taught me, 30-some years ago. Ethan's smile softened. She was a good teacher, the best, Arthur agreed. In the living room, Poppy was showing Diane her collection of snow globes, a new tradition she'd started. Each one represented something special: the bakery, the summer fair, the hill where they'd watched the sunset. And this one, Poppy said, holding up a simple globe with a small house inside, is Mr. Hemsley's house. Mommy got it made special. Diane examined it carefully. Inside the globe, when you shook it, pink glitter swirled around the tiny house. That's beautiful, honey. It's to remember the night everything changed, Poppy said seriously. Mommy says sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. Laia, overhearing from the kitchen, felt her throat tighten. She caught Arthur's eye, and he nodded. A small gesture that said everything words couldn't. When dinner was finally ready, they gathered around the table that had once been set for 1, then 2, and now held 6. Before they ate, Arthur cleared his throat. I'm not much for speeches, but I wanted to say something. Everyone quieted, looking at him. He looked around the table at his son, found again. At Laia and Poppy, who'd knocked on his door when he'd needed it most. At Diane, who'd found the courage to come home to her daughter. Last year at this time, I was alone, he began, his voice rough with emotion. I'd convinced myself that was what I deserved. That silence was safer than risking hurt again. He paused, composing himself. But someone knocked anyway, and that knock, that simple act of kindness from strangers, it saved my life. It brought my son home. It reminded me that family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up, who stay, who love you even when you've forgotten how to love yourself. Poppy reached over and took his hand. We'll always show up, Mr. Hemsley. Arthur squeezed her small hand gently. I know you will, sweetheart, and that's the greatest gift an old man could ask for. Ethan raised his glass. To showing up, everyone echoed. And to pink ribbons, Poppy added. Arthur laughed, deep and genuine. And to pink ribbons. After dinner, as snow began to fall softly outside, they gathered in the living room. Ethan built up the fire, while Diane helped Poppy hang a new ornament on the tree. Laia and Arthur stood by the window, watching the snow dust the street in white. Do you ever think about that night? Laia asked quietly. When we first knocked, every day, Arthur admitted. I almost didn't answer. What changed your mind? He smiled. I saw that little girl shivering in the cold, and I remembered what it felt like to need warmth, to need someone to open the door. I'm glad you did, Laia said. Me too. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall. Down the street, other houses glowed warm against the night. Somewhere, church bells began to chime. Arthur turned from the window and looked at his family, this beautiful, unexpected, perfect family that had built itself from broken pieces and second chances. "You know," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "my Margaret used to say that home isn't a place, it's a feeling." Ethan looked up from the fire. "I remember her saying that." Arthur nodded. "I spent 15 years not feeling it, but now," he looked around the room, his eyes bright, "now I feel it everywhere." Poppy climbed into his lap, something that had become their tradition. "Tell us the story again," she said. "About the night we knocked on your door." Arthur smiled. "You've heard it 100 times. I want to hear it 100 more," she insisted. So Arthur told the story, how he'd been sitting alone in the dark, how he'd heard 3 knocks that changed everything, how a little girl with a pink ribbon and her brave mother had reminded him what it meant to be alive. As he spoke, Laia leaned against Ethan's shoulder, a gesture so natural now that neither of them thought twice about it. Diane sat beside them, her hand resting on her daughter's knee, grateful for every moment she'd almost lost. When Arthur finished, Poppy looked up at him with those wide, earnest eyes. "And we all lived happily ever after." Arthur chuckled. "Well, we're still living it, sweetheart. The story's not over yet." "Good," Poppy said, settling deeper into his arms. "I don't want it to end." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Snow Ridge in white. The town sparkled with lights, gold and red and green, each window a small beacon of warmth against the dark. And in the last house on Pine Hollow Road, the house that had once been the darkest of all, every window glowed bright. The pink ribbon still hung on the Christmas tree, faded but precious, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes in the smallest packages. Sometimes hope arrives at your door with nothing but cookies and a child's smile. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply open the door when someone knocks. As the clock chimed midnight, and Christmas Day officially began, Arthur looked around his living room one more time. At the son he'd found again, at the woman and child who'd saved him, at the grandmother who'd found her way home, at the family they'd all built together from courage and forgiveness and love. "Merry Christmas," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Dad," Ethan replied. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Hemsley," Laia and Poppy said in unison. "Merry Christmas, Arthur," Diane added. And in that moment, surrounded by the people he loved in the home that had finally learned to smile again, Arthur Hemsley understood what his wife had meant all those years ago. Home wasn't a place. It was this warmth, this laughter, this love. It was right here, and it always had been, waiting patiently for him to open the door and let it back in. "You know, for most of my life, I thought silence was peace. I thought if I kept the world out, if I kept people out, the pain would stay quiet too. But silence doesn't heal. It just hides the hurt long enough for you to forget how to speak." Then one night, someone knocked on my door. Not a miracle, not an angel, just a young woman and her little girl standing in the snow with cookies and a smile. That's how it happens sometimes. The light doesn't come crashing in. It just shows up small and patient and kind. They didn't fix me, they didn't have to, they just reminded me what living sounded like. And somewhere along the way, I stopped counting the years I'd lost, and started being grateful for the ones I still had left. I used to believe second chances were for fools. Now I know they're for the brave, for the ones who open the door, even when it hurts to hope again. So if you're listening to this, if you've been waiting for a knock that never came, or if you've closed the door so long you forgot what warmth feels like, hear this from an old man who once did the same. It's never too late to forgive, to reach out, to start over. Because sometimes, the miracle isn't in who's knocking, it's in the fact that you still have the courage to open the door. That's the story of how a lonely man found his family again, and how hope, even in the coldest seasons, still knows where to find us. My name is Arthur Hemsley. This is my story, and if it touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you still believe in, then maybe tonight, you'll knock on a door of your own. Maybe you'll be the one who changes someone's world, or maybe you'll finally open yours. Until we meet again, stay kind, stay open, and keep believing. The best stories are the ones we're still writing. 1 year later, Sweet Haven Bakery expanded to a second location. Ethan Hemsley moved permanently to Snow Ridge and proposed to Laia on the hill where they'd watched the sunset.
She said yes. Arthur walked her down the aisle that spring, with Poppy as flower girl, and Diane crying happy tears in the front row. The pink ribbon, now carefully preserved in a frame, hangs in their home, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes. And every Christmas Eve, they gather at the house on Pine Hollow Road, the house that learned to smile, and tell the story of the night everything changed. Because some stories deserve to be told again and again, and some families are worth every knock, every risk, every moment of courage it takes to let love back in.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.